Okay, let's dive right in. Today we're exploring exactly what happens when high-stakes aviation intersects directly with critical healthcare. We're talking about hospital helipads and HMS. If you've ever watched a helicopter descending toward a hospital roof and wondered about the incredible logistics making that possible, well, you're in the right place. We are going to break down this highly synchronized, high-pressure world. Our entire explainer today is built around one absolutely crucial core philosophy, and it's this. The flight may end at the helipad, the patient journey does not. It's so easy to just focus on the dramatic arrival of a helicopter. But in reality, that aircraft is just one moving part in a much larger, beautifully orchestrated machine dedicated to saving a life. So we're going to look way beyond the concrete landing pad itself to really understand this massive, coordinated ecosystem. At its core, the hospital helipad operates as a critical, highly active link in the patient care chain. The entire purpose of this complex operation, merging strict aviation protocols with time-critical medical treatment, is actually incredibly simple. It's all about safely delivering the right patient to the right place at the exact right time. It is aviation and healthcare working flawlessly together for one shared goal. Before we go any further, let's quickly iron out the terminology because these terms get thrown around a lot and they are definitely not universally interchangeable. HEMS stands for Helicopter Emergency Medical Service, and that specifically focuses on bringing urgent, advanced clinical capability directly to where it's needed most. Now, you might also hear air ambulance or medical transport. Those are typically for planned movements. And terms like medevac or casevac, those are usually reserved for military or specific government contexts when moving casualties. Their exact meanings really depend on the jurisdiction and the organization, but for our purposes today, we are zeroing in on the rapid clinical response of HEMS. To truly grasp the complete picture, we have to look at the full scope of a HEMS mission. It relies on a very precise sequence. It starts right at the initial incident with the mobilization of a highly specialized team. Then you have advanced clinical care delivered right there at the scene, followed by rapid, direct flight transport, and finally hospital arrival. So we're not talking about a taxi service in the sky here. It's essentially the delivery of an emergency room directly to the roadside, followed by a highly coordinated sprint back to the hospital. So when we talk about actually arriving at that hospital, the infrastructure matters immensely. We generally see two main types of helipads, ground level and rooftop. Ground level pads are great because they offer fantastic direct ambulance access and really short transfer distances, but they require strict perimeter control to keep pedestrians and vehicles out of harm's way. Rooftop pads, on the other hand, provide highly secure, controlled elevator access straight down to the emergency department. The catch? They demand incredibly complex structural building strength. Plus, surprisingly enough, rooftop pads force pilots to contend with unpredictable microclimates and complex wind shear created by the building itself. Because of these massive differences, there is absolutely no one-size-fits-all solution. The best option for any given facility relies entirely on the hospital's specific layout, their patient care workflow, local regulations, and the surrounding environment. But honestly, regardless of whether they are on the ground or up in the sky, both options require meticulously planned safe approach paths, constant obstacle monitoring, and highly trained personnel to operate safely. Now, zooming out into the airspace, the crucial point to remember is that a helipad does not exist in isolation. Safe approaches and departures depend entirely on assessing and planning for a constantly changing surrounding environment. A safe approach actually begins long before the landing, and a safe departure continues long after takeoff. The aviation crew has to see the big picture. They need to understand exactly what is happening in the airspace and on the ground around that specific hospital. To keep that aircraft safe, these teams have to monitor a highly dynamic list of variables. We're talking about shifting winds, bouncing around nearby buildings, temporary construction cranes that literally might not have been there yesterday, communication antennas, sudden adverse weather, reducing visibility, and challenging lighting conditions at night. And increasingly today, they have to be on extremely high alert for the dangerous presence of unauthorized drones. What was a totally safe approach path yesterday might not be safe today. Constant assessment is just mandatory. Okay, so once the approach is flawless and the aircraft finally touches down, the aviation phase basically hits pause and the intense facility-based healthcare phase revs up. Landing is really merely the halfway point of the mission. Touching down safely is just the catalyst that kicks off a time-critical, highly coordinated handover process. Think of this continuous journey as a high-stakes relay race. We can break it down into 6 distinct phases. From the safe shutdown of the aircraft, moving through designated access routes, hitting the secure lifts, and navigating hospital corridors, every single minute matters as the patient is moved seamlessly from the helicopter directly to the waiting emergency department team. It requires incredibly precise, clear communication and totally unobstructed routes.
And a safe landing and a smooth transfer don't just happen by magic. It is an incredibly busy scene out there on the pad. You have aviation and healthcare professionals operating in the exact same tight space at the exact same time. It requires the seamless coordination of so many different professions, all sharing one high-pressure operating environment. Well, everyone out on that pad might be wearing a completely different uniform. They all share a single unifying goal: patient safety. The flight crew is focused on safely operating the aircraft. The HEMS and hospital clinical teams take over the patient's continuous care. But then you also have security personnel controlling the crowds, facilities teams managing the building's complex infrastructure, and maintenance crews ensuring the equipment works flawlessly. It's the ultimate team effort, where intense situational awareness and mutual respect are absolutely non-negotiable. Of course, operating in this bustling environment introduces immense physical risks, from the air, the ground, and the surroundings. Teams must mitigate hurricane-like rotor downwash, which can easily blow people or heavy equipment right over. They have to constantly clear FOD, or foreign object debris, that could be sucked into the helicopter's engines. On top of that, they're managing unauthorized public access, moving vehicles, night glare, and intense noise that heavily impacts communication. It's a highly dynamic risk environment where change is literally the only constant. So this brings up a very practical question, right? With all these variables, the weather, the maintenance, the construction, what happens when an intense storm, a sudden infrastructure failure, or an operational restriction simply closes the primary hospital helipad? Because the emergency certainly doesn't stop just because a helipad is closed. Patient care has to continue, which is exactly why hospitals and aviation teams never just wing it. They rely on very strict, pre-planned contingency procedures. This means rapidly assessing the failure, activating an alternative plan without any delay, and transferring the patient seamlessly, all while making sure to take the time to review and learn from the incident afterward. They have to anticipate, plan, coordinate, and adapt on a dime. When implementing those alternatives, teams might divert to another hospital's helipad within the region, they might use a pre-identified nearby landing zone with safe ground access, or they could even utilize fixed-wing transfers for longer distances. But, and this is a critical takeaway here, these alternatives are not automatically suitable or authorized. Every single decision is highly dependent on the patient's critical condition, the receiving facility's capacity, and strict compliance with local regulatory and airspace rules. It takes massive coordination behind the scenes. When you zoom all the way out, you realize that everything we've just discussed, the helicopters, the clinical teams, the security personnel, the emergency services, the complex regulations, and the infrastructure itself, it all forms one massive coordinated system orbiting around a single central purpose: the patient. Their safety, their dignity, and their best possible outcome drive every single decision made in the air and on the ground. And that brings us right back to our final powerful thought. The helipad is not the end of the journey, it is just one vital connection in a much larger ecosystem designed to save a life. So the next time you hear those rotors chopping through the air and you look up at a descending medical helicopter, are you just going to see an aircraft landing? Or will you see the invisible, perfectly synchronized ecosystem of hundreds of dedicated professionals springing into action? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Stay curious and keep learning.